Good evening or morning or afternoon or whatever time you're listening to us or watching us here on Inside Carolina. I'm Joey Powell. Welcome back. It's another new season of the Throwback, season 2, episode 1. And y'all, let me tell you, not only am I glad to have this platform again to be able to go through these old games and big moments in UNC athletic history, but I'm really pumped to be talking about the game we're talking about today with the guys that I'm talking with. And as you see them here on your screen, as always, the most beautiful, bombastic, just intelligence beyond sports writer on the Inside Carolina roster. Greg Barnes is here. Greg, how you feeling?
I'm feeling great. Looking forward to reminiscing here.
Yeah, man, it'll be a fun one. And dragged away from the pits of fatherhood as he joins us looking refreshed because his kid is sleeping. Life is starting to get into a new normal for the man. Uh, Number 66 in your programs, number 1 in your heart, Mike Ingersoll. Counselor, how are you?
I'm doing good, Your Honor. When you said beautiful and bombastic,
You
I
thought I
knew
was
that.
coming to you.
Yeah, I know. Well, I knew you weren't coming to me. That's
Well, look, I try to gas you guys up as best I can so that we can have a good podcast for the people because that's what we're here for. We're here for all of the folks out there in IC land who are digging us tonight. And uh, guys, you know why I brought you here. I'm going to set this up, but before I can set it up, I want to talk a little bit about nostalgia because that's what this throwback is all about. And you know what? You can actually buy nostalgia. You know where you can buy nostalgia? Johnny T-shirt.
Well
JohnnyT-shirt.com.
gained.
very
You know
well
how
done.
you know how I can say you can buy nostalgia from Johnny T-shirt because they have things that are throwbacks. They have things that are from now. They have things like shirts and hats and gadgets and what have you with the UNC logo and moniker on it that will take you back to your time in Chapel Hill, or if you're a fan, the time that you went to your first game or wherever you first came in contact with the UNC brand. Johnny T-shirts got it. They've got all of the top brands possible. JohnnyT-shirt.com or right there on Franklin Street in Chapel Hill. Great folks. They've been supporters of ours for a long time. We want to make sure we show them some love the way they have shown love to Inside Carolina and the IC family and all of the great content that we put out, and hoping to continue that string, strand, trend, all of those words that I just amalgamated. We want to make sure that we're continuing that with good content tonight. Tonight we're going to talk about the 2010 Music City Bowl.
You know what gives me nostalgia, Joey?
What's that?
All of Greg's dark hair reminds me of when I had some. And you know how I know? You know how I know it's legitimate? How I know it's real? Look at his scruff on his face. It's just as dark as the hair on top of his head. Just like you know how everybody can know that the hair on top of my head is really gray. Look at the translucent scruff on my down
Translucent.
here on my jawline and my chin.
I see
And
you with the SAT words over
Joey,
there.
Joey, people watching this may make the very poor mistake that for some reason I am close to Mike's age when in fact I am at least a decade older than him. So
Minimum.
how about that for genetics?
Man,
Yeah. Genetics and untreated concussions. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. There we go.
all of which are valid and real. And yeah, I do think Greg's got a little bit with the scruff. He's got almost a Charles Bronson thing going on. If he could pull off the stash, I could see it.
I made a mistake at work today and I told him just blame the CTE because my brain basically looks like an ant farm. Just tunnels and holes all over the place.
Just well, at least they left the good parts, right? And
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna bleed that good part dry tonight. 2010 Music City Bowl, Nashville. It was the last day of the year. Uh, what's that? 12/31, 2010. If you're keeping score um, by the old ecumenian calendar or whatever. UNC comes into the game 7-5. UT comes into the game 6-6. Both teams, North Carolina kind of backdoored their way into this game.
Mhm.
Had a great season, a lot of, and we've talked about it extensively on Inside Carolina. Mike did a great write up about it. Greg has covered it extensively, but we talked about that 2010 season and how up and down and just how loaded the team was, but dealing with the NCAA stuff and then the injury bug, which was so rampant in the locker room that year. UNC kind of swooned late into the season. They dropped a game to NC State, dropped a game to Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech was ranked, eked by Duke, I think by 5 or so. But UNC still had kind of the it factor and was a very attractive team to have in this game. And I got to think that's why I think it was Franklin American Mortgage people wanted him at that time. UT, different side, kind of a different situation. They struggled early, had some quarterback issues, put Tyler Bray in I guess October, and then won their last 4 games to get into a bowl. Not necessarily the best season by Tennessee fans' terms, but definitely a good season considering that they were on their third coach in 3 years, which got mentioned ad nauseum during this game. But then also, with a freshman quarterback, and then 10 years ago, a freshman quarterback was still a little bit of a novelty. So Tennessee kind of gets in this game. They're definitely a big draw, as you will see on this game. It ends up being a probably, if I'm being generous, 85-15 orange versus light blue in the stands. I mean, I remember being at that game. I don't know if you guys can remember because you guys were on the field, but if I heard Rocky Top one time that night, it was reminiscent of something that would have been in a torture chamber in some sort of U.S. prison camp because it was everywhere. Whether they scored or not, they played the song. Mike, did you hear that on the field?
No, all that I will say that I was more concerned on the sideline with the warm air that was running through the bench because at that point, my public schooling that I grew up with never afforded me the opportunity to experience something as luxurious as warm air running through an NFL sideline bench. And I was pretty mesmerized by that whole experience, to be honest with you. So no, I didn't hear the Rocky Top, but it was it was obvious when you looked in the stands who the home team was in that game. It was, if there were 60,000 people there, 55,000 of them were wearing orange.
Sure.
There was no question at all that was a road game for us. And we felt that. We felt that pressure in the stadium too.
Yeah, and
to your
Joey,
point- Go ahead.
that was the year that we first started traveling for our pregame radio show, I see.
Mm.
And the funny thing about it, I guess kind of sad if you want to think about it, is everybody had built up towards that LSU game. And so we had rented out a parking lot outside of the Georgia Dome. And it fit with what was going on with UNC football because we had issues with the beer kegs, like the audio wasn't working with the broadcasting equipment. It was just a mess, but it was our first time and we got through it, and we always kind of laugh about that. Well, WCHL had set us up inside a bar there in Nashville. And for those who have not been there, it's a great setup because you have the downtown strip, right?
Broadway, yep.
It's excellent. And you go there and you party all day. And then all you have to do is walk across the bridge, across the river to get to the stadium. Mm-hmm. So it's fantastic. But to your point, as we're walking in and I'm trying to find this bar because we're set up in the very back of this bar broadcasting, it is nothing but Tennessee fans. And fortunately, we had been able to get the word out that, hey, we're broadcasting from this particular bar. So there was enough Carolina people in there. But just walking up and down the street, it was all orange. That's all you saw. And so we knew at that point in time, early in the afternoon, they were already rowdy, but it was going to be a predominantly Tennessee fan base, Tennessee crowd. And as it turns out, that proved problematic as the game wore on.
We had a feeling we were going to have an issue in terms of fan presence and ultimate vibe and buzz in the stadium during the week when we were out partying during the week. And every single person we ran into was a Tennessee fan, either coming in from out of town or from Nashville or somewhere proximate to Nashville in Tennessee. Every single person had orange on or a Tennessee hat, or, it was, you could tell. And the message was sent fairly quickly in the week for us that it was going to be a tough environment and it wasn't going to be a typical neutral site bowl game.
Two things I want to throw out. First off, Mike, to talk about your attendance number. You said 55K. It was a 69,000 attendance number, which was just a nice number to have at a football game. And
nice,
yeah. And to your point, 55,000 may have been light because it was jam packed, especially when you see the overhead aerial view of the stadium. Greg, I'm not sure where the press box was, but I love the fact that when you were talking about the radio show and difficulties that you guys had with the opener in Atlanta, the first thing you mentioned was not audio or technical difficulties, was that you had problems with the beer keg. So shout out to you for keeping it real in that response.
Yeah.
Guys, as both of you laid out, this was absolutely, I don't care what the program said or what the bowl site said, it's absolutely a home game for Tennessee. Mike, could you feel that once you got to the stadium? You talked about all the prep and you're seeing all the drunk orange that week and people trying to, hamper harsh your mellow while you're out, partying with your buddies that week. But could you tell it once you got to the stadium, or did you have to wait until kickoff before you felt that, okay, this is totally a Tennessee home game?
Most of the fans we saw during pregame were wearing orange, and usually fan presence before a game will tell you whether it's going to be a packed game, whether fans are going to be rowdy, and really who all is going to be there, where they're going to be sitting. And most of the fans, when we were coming in for pregame, were lined up behind us where we were warming up, and they were starting to fill in around the 50 and get to their seats, those that weren't just out tailgating super hard. So, when we saw all those fans starting to trickle in and the vast majority of them were wearing orange, we knew it was going to be a tough environment. Now, I didn't realize the full extent of that until kickoff. And we looked around and we realized that all UNC had was one little pocket of tickets, and that's not to disparage our fans or anything like that. It's just the game's in Nashville. It's against Tennessee. They're going to buy up all the tickets. It's just how it works. I mean, that fan base is rabid. So, we thought in prep during the week that it was going to be a Tennessee heavy crowd, but we didn't realize the monopoly they had exerted over those tickets leading up to that football game.
Sure. Greg, when you were kind of leading up to this game, did it feel like a pretty big matchup? Because again, you're talking about Tennessee, which is an SEC opponent, big time brand still in the, if nothing else, all over that state, against a geographic rival in North Carolina. Those two teams really don't see each other. I think there had been a series bought out at some point right around that time between those two schools. And I think it was Tennessee because they were dealing with some coaching issues with Lane Kiffin to Derek Dooley and so on and so forth. Did you feel like from covering the game standpoint, did it feel like a big game to you outside of just being a bowl game?
For sure. And this is back when the Music City Bowl was a bigger deal than maybe it is now. It was higher up on the bowl hierarchy. And so I think the fact that they were able to get Tennessee in the home state and get Butch Davis in North Carolina, which had received all of the attention in 2010. It was kind of a no-brainer. And so North Carolina got a little bit of a bump because of that. And because everybody knew that, it was a good team, even though they'd been through so much adversity. And so for sure, that was a very big scene for North Carolina to be able to finish the season. So we knew that going in. We also thought that, hey, it's a big matchup. It's a big bowl game to play in. Given everything this team has gone through this year, this is a legitimate opportunity to close the season on a high note. We just never envisioned that it would actually end the way that it did.
We'll
get there.
I'll tell you what was funny and what really hyped that game up for us internally was during off-season workouts. You were talking about this, Joey. You mentioned how the series that got bought out. It's a border rivalry, and it's in Tennessee. I should preface everything I say with this: Tennessee, North Carolina football is a game that should be played much, much, much more frequently than it really is. And I think historically it was, and then the series just kind of died off. But it is a natural border rivalry. And I think the fan base would treat it that way. And it's a game I'd like to see more. I'd like to see more UNC South Carolina and more UNC Tennessee, just as a regional type thing, if we'd ever be able to get it. But during off-season workouts, that's when the game we were supposed to have got bought out. And I can't remember I think maybe we replaced them with Rutgers or someone. I can't remember who we replaced them with, but Dooley canceled the home and home series, or I should say Tennessee's AD. Dooley just co-signed it. Tennessee's AD canceled the home and home series. And one of the reasons that we heard from Tennessee's camp was that they were in a rebuilding phase and, they were trying to make sure they had, the best schedule possible to realize early success for all the young players and the rebuilt roster and blah, blah, blah. And what that amounted to was that they didn't think they were of the caliber that UNC, that Carolina football was at that time. And that was something that I believe came from Butch. That wasn't the PR statement that was released, but that was a conversation that happened internally between the staffs. Why we're doing this. It was explained to us that, look, man, we're just from Tennessee's camp. Like, we're not in a position to be able to compete with that roster because the NCAA stuff hadn't hit yet. Not in its full glory. So yeah, I mean, it was a fair assessment, frankly. That team we've talked about a million times for the last decade, how stacked it was. But, it was funny to us because in the offseason, they canceled that game. And we laughed about that during offseason workouts. And we were clowning Tennessee during offseason workouts. I remember the day that it happened and we got told the game was going to be canceled for the home and home series. And then we end up drawing them in the bowl game. And it just, for us internally, that was like, this is hilarious to us because you can't get away from us. You've tried to get away from us, and now here it is. So we were a little determined to show them and prove them right. This is why you canceled this game. This is why you canceled that home and home. We're going to show you why. So there was some added motivation there for us, even though we were playing with, essentially a depleted roster.
Yeah, Joey, and to kind of back up what Mike's saying there, the release came out on August 17th. So that was before the famous Holden Thorpe press conference with all the academic stuff.
Right.
But Mike Hamilton, who was Tennessee's athletic director, actually gave this quote to Joe Shad at ESPN. The reality is we're not back to where we want to be yet. And then said, quote, effort is to lighten the load regarding the schedule.
Yep. That's got to sting a little bit if you're a Rocky Top fan. So Greg, Mike did a great job of kind of setting the kismet that came between this, game getting canceled and still appearing at the end of the schedule. Going into this game, you had a lot of different things going on. I think you had some players who were injured. You had some players who had some offseason things they tried to get cleaned up and just couldn't get back in time for the game. You probably have some guys that sat out due to pro aspirations. Greg, do you remember, as the 15 practices or whatever so happened, do you remember when you felt like, okay, this is really going to be a depleted team? Because if we're being honest here, there was a lot of names that played that season, whether healthy or not, that were not available for this game.
Yeah, I guess really it was kind of the Anthony Elsie news. I think that was really what kind of stood out as, all right, this is going to be somewhat of an issue. But it was an interesting year, and Kevin Reddick said this the next year, and I agreed with it from the time that the season transpired. I really thought this is one of the most impressive years that I've covered. I'm 15 years in now covering UNC football, and this one still stands out. Not only with the coaching staff, with what they did, but the players had so much crap to deal with all season long. And it seemed like it was just hit after hit after hit. And yet they persevered, and they were solid throughout, and they never made excuses, and they kept battling. And so even though there was some players out and there was some things that didn't go their way, I don't know if I was immune to it at that point in time. It was something we were aware of, but we just felt like, these guys have been through this. This is not going to shock their system.
Right.
They're just going to go out and bust their tail. And there was some bad news. It wasn't anything earth-shattering, at least to me and to other members in the media.
Oh, Greg, I'll tell you, I appreciate. Sorry, Joe, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I'll tell you that I appreciate you saying that. That's a point that I've made to a lot of people, and I think I made it at the time. In my personal life, just family and friends, there was a lot of national championship aspirations going into that season, and we and I and my teammates and all of us talked about it a lot in that, that in memoriam 2010 piece that we published over the summer. There was, or I guess in the early fall. There was a lot of talk about national championships, and there was a lot of talk about conference championships and Orange Bowls, and a lot of expectations. And I will say that for me personally, one of the things that I took out of that season was that I may have been more proud of that team, very similar to what Kevin told you. I may have been more proud of that Music City Bowl team winning 8 games, which to me seemed more impressive given all the circumstances and given all the loss and all the depletion and all the distractions, than if we'd been playing at full strength and just met expectations and played for or won a national championship or an Orange Bowl. There's just something about that season that I thought my teammates deserved a lot of credit. And a lot of people recognize that. Some folks, that's a gloss on the season that you don't necessarily appreciate if you haven't paid attention to it at a granular level, the way that you did, or the way that my teammates who lived it did. But there was something different and special about that season. And I think that the 8 wins, beating Tennessee, an SEC opponent, in what is a rivalry game with all of the backdrop of canceling the game and all that irony that came with it, that, beating an SEC team and essentially, in their home state at what is essentially an SEC home game, and winning 8 games after all the distractions, after all that loss, and after all the things that we had to deal with that season, I say I'm probably more proud of that team than I would have been if we won a national title. I'll never know if we won a national title how I would have felt, but I can say that there's a lot of kudos that should go around to my teammates and especially that coaching staff for getting that team through that season and finishing it out on a high note. A bowl win, which we weren't able to pull off the 2 years prior at full strength either, I should say.
Right.
And I've mentioned this a couple times on our podcasts, but not in this particular setting. But when Tommy Thigpen came back to UNC with Larry Fedora a couple of years ago, I sat and had a long conversation with him, and he was adamant that 2010 North Carolina team had the potential in the coaching staff to win the national championship. He thought that was the most talented roster in the country. And that's relevant because Tommy Thigpen was at Auburn at the time, which won the national championship that year. And as
Had a guy named Cam Newton.
That's right. As Tommy said, the only difference between Auburn and maybe North Carolina before some of the NCAA mess is that Auburn had Cam Newton, and he was the game changer.
So let's get into the game itself a little bit, because I think you guys have nailed kind of what it felt like coming into it, and a little bit of the off-season prep and kind of the hullabaloo around the actual game and the pageantry. This game started out very much like North Carolina was going to walk the dog on Tennessee with some smash mouth, just run it downhill, which is was kind of the hallmark of Butch's teams. They were never going to be really flashy, but the defense was going to win the game for them. The offense was going to do a lot of ball control, just beat you at the point of attack type stuff. And Shaun Draughn gets and we're going to talk to him a little bit later, but Shaun Draughn gets a 58-yard touchdown, like 4 plays into the game for UNC on offense. Mike, did you guys feel like, oh, this is going to be easy?
Well, we never thought it was going to be easy because we watched plenty of film on them, and I will give Tennessee a lot of credit here. That was the best 6-6 team I'd seen on film in a long time. And they caught some tough breaks in some games earlier that year. And if you go back and you watch Tennessee's season, we had a couple close games went our way. They had several close games that went the other way. But there was no doubt that team was talented. And there was no doubt that team played exceptionally hard on film. So we knew the opponent that we were going to be dealing with when we came into that game. It was surprising, frankly, that we broke one open so quick, especially on the ground like that. I didn't think, everything we'd seen from Tennessee on film was that, they had an ability to stop the run. And we thought that their personnel up front matched up well with our personnel up front, and that we were going to have to beat them through the air and really execute and be clean. So busting one open real quick and hitting them in the mouth like that early on in that game on that first drive, we really thought set the tone for the rest of the game. Now, what you saw later on was it ended up being we traded blows back and forth. Tennessee really hunkered down and started taking care of business after that. And I think we caught them on their heels. I'm not sure what happened for them. I don't know if it was a coverage breakdown or a personnel breakdown or what have you, or, maybe I'm not giving them credit. We may have just perfectly executed that outside zone because we broke it on, it was 19. It was just a simple outside zone. We got the backside cut off. You watch Ed Barham on the film. Ed gets a great block on the front end. Shaun makes a guy miss. The field was a little slick at that point.
Mm-hmm.
The evening dew had just started setting in on the grass. Shaun makes one guy miss and he's off to the races. And I will tell you that when that happened, I thought it was going to be Shaun's coming out party, which is exactly what it turned out to be. Yep. And we were trying to do that for him because Shaun had been such a workhorse for us that entire year. He dealt with some ankle injuries, but he had always been, when he was in the game, he was always reliable. He always played a million miles an hour. And we wanted to make sure that on senior night, the seniors did for him. We wanted him to get that, but I think the entire team, the entire offense especially, wanted Shaun to have that breakout game and to be that feature back and really shine. And we thought that was an early indication that he would, and he didn't let us down.
Yeah, Christian Wilson had an amazing kick-out block.
Yes, he did.
After the handoff on that play too, which, so Mike and I were texting back and forth, Greg, and I'll let him touch on this. I'm going to come back to you for something else. Mike, did Tennessee twist as much as I feel like they did when I rewatched the game, or is it just the couple of plays that I saw were a little more?
Tennessee played more straight up during that game than we thought they would. When they did bring anything, it was typically a twist. Now later in the game, they started blitzing a little more frequently than we thought they would, based on what we saw the first 2-3 quarters, because they stayed in their base front most of that game and just tried to beat us head up and one-on-one. And when they realized they weren't going to beat us one-on-one, and this is indicative of all defensive lines and all defensive schemes, when your Jimmies and Joes can't beat the other Jimmies and Joes, then you start scheming. And if your defensive line isn't beating the offensive line in pass rush and in the run game, then you start twisting them. And we started seeing that because overall, I thought the offensive line played pretty well early on in that game and pretty consistently through halftime. So in the second half, we started seeing a little bit more of that. But early on, it was very vanilla what we saw from them. And it was surprising because on film, they blitz like crazy. I do remember that distinctively from that game.
Greg, Mike makes a great point, and we're talking about how it was kind of a heavyweight fight, specifically in the first half, and then the third quarter went kind of meh. Do you remember much about that, or what did you see when rewatching it that struck you about the way both of these coordinators were calling the games?
Well, I think really what stood out to me, just kind of from an overall perspective, you mentioned Shaun's big run, and you're thinking, okay, well now North Carolina's got the start they needed with this crowd. Things should be rolling. And after that, as Mike said, Tennessee really locked down. And I think it was the next 6 drives where Carolina had maybe 60 total yards. And that's when things kind of swung. And then, of course, North Carolina had that late score in the first half that was critically important. But I mean, it was John Shoop doing John Shoop things. And with the defense playing as well as it was, Tennessee had no run game whatsoever. And they knew that the only way to have success was for Tyler Bray to have some good looks, and he had enough of them to make it interesting. But I just really saw North Carolina defense doing what it had done previous 2 years. And so Shoop was going to be a little bit conservative in some of his play calls, which we had all kind of grown accustomed to. And that's what Butch Davis wanted. And that's how it played out primarily through the first half.
Yeah, the Tennessee rushing stats were not pretty. 29 attempts for 27 yards. Tyler Bray had a decent game throwing the ball, but he had to throw it 45 times to get his 312 yards, and he did throw 3 picks.
Yep.
Mike, what do you guys remember about seeing a guy? And I know you were an offensive player, but you're hearing the game prep. What do you guys remember about a guy like Tyler Bray, who was as young as he could be, even with the experience he had? But as Tar Heel fans would find out, kid had a little bit of talk about him, and I think that actually propelled him until it didn't.
Yeah, that's exactly what our defensive guys were talking about, because they could see that on film. They could see that he was young and he made young player mistakes, but he was exceptionally raw and talented. I mean, the ability was there. The ability to beat you with his arm was there. So the guys knew that he had some talent, and there was going to come a point where he was going to break open. They just didn't want it to be against them in the bowl game. But you could also see him talking and jawing a little bit on film, as young players do. And what we saw in that game is that it came back and it bit him, because Tyler Bray, unfortunately, became a meme after that in the early days of memes.
He was a baby meme. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Greg, is there a specific play, and I'm going to take the Shaun Draughn play off the table. Is there a specific play in that game that stands out to you? Because I think there's a lot that, as we touched on, we started kind of the show tonight. There's a lot of that game that really was kind of a direct reflection of the whole season wrapped up into a nice little package. Is there one play that you feel like stuck out at you from this game, and you're like, man, if there's ever been a play for North Carolina football in 2010, this was it?
Gosh, that's a tough question. I mean, the obvious one that we'll get to. I thought Todd Harrelson's catch was maybe the catch of the year.
Guy had like 3 catches the whole season, and then gets that one. Yeah.
And that was a dirty hit if there ever was one. And then, of course, the running play that the drone had a little bit later is a late hit, which is a big play. But Harrelson's catch has always been the one that has stood out to me. I know there's a number of them, but just his ability to hang on to that pass in such a critical time period. And that set the stage for what was to come. And so that stands out above the rest.
Mike, what are you looking for in a game like that, where it's obvious that it's a heavyweight fight? It gets down to the point where in the fourth quarter, that's when the haymakers start coming. As you're playing through that, what are you looking for? What are the telltale signs where you feel like your team has a real chance to exploit the opponent for the kill shot? Is it a guy cheating? Is it a guy losing his mental discipline? Is it a guy getting tired? What is it?
It was, for me in that game specifically, it was huge chunks. So we had a lot of big plays, and we won the explosive play battle. And when I talk about explosive plays, this is a John Shoop thing. Explosive plays are anything 20 yards or more, whether through the air or the ground. And we definitely won the explosive play component of that football game. And I think back to play, and I was actually just rewatching it on the all 22 while Greg was talking. Um, there was a 40-yard touchdown. TJ rolls out to his left. I think it was 3rd and 1 from the 39-yard line in the second quarter. We were down 14-10.
Mm-hmm.
TJ rolls out to his left. We get decent protection up front. I think they only ended up bringing 3. They dropped a 4th. They tried some movement up front, but left side did a really good job of. And I think it was James Hurst was over there with John Cooper. James did a really good job of watching the defensive end down when he tried to come inside, and they just gobbled up what was supposed to be a design twist over there. And TJ just sort of rolls out and leaks out to his left and then just drops one 40 yards right in the bucket to Eric Highsmith. Mm-hmm. And when I saw that coupled with Shaun's early run, some of the big gains that we had both, before that had led to that point, I was supremely confident that no matter what happened in that game, we were always going to have the opportunity to just break it open with a big play. So if we just chipped away and we got positive yards, even if it was 1 yard, and we just 2 yards, 4 yards, 8 yards, 2 yards, 1 yard, we would eventually break one open because that had been the theme that entire game. The first drive, it just sort of happened 2-3 plays into the game. I don't want to say by accident, but by accident. And but we saw that theme continue to play out every drive after that, for the most part, with the exception of, we had at one point where it's six drives, 60 yards, but everything else surrounding that little, hiatus, we were able to get big chunk plays. They might not have gone for touchdowns, but we were able to get 15, 20 yards a clip really whenever we wanted to. So I felt supremely confident early in that game that even if we were down, we would come back and we would be able to retake the lead if it did become a shootout, which is exactly what ended up happening. And I think that 3rd and 1 from the 39 in the second quarter, that touchdown, we were down 14-10. I think that's a perfect example of that.
I don't want to totally make this about TJ Yates, but I do want to point out he had, like we said, probably one of the most TJ Yates games you can ever remember. Didn't have the greatest completion rate. He was 23 of 39, threw for 234 yards, a touchdown and a pick. The other thing is he managed the game well. And I think part of that's him being a senior, but also part of it's him being synced up with his offensive coordinator. There was a point in the fourth quarter, which looked at that point like UNC had lost the game, the 3rd and 20 to Dwight Jones, where he literally hits Dwight Jones in the hands as soon as Jones comes out of at the top of his route. And he catches it just beyond the sticks. There's a linebacker there and a corner there, and it still hits Jones, high points him right in the numbers, and Dwight Jones drops the ball. But I also want to point out, just to reiterate, that was a very TJ Yates game. You come down in the 31 seconds, you're down 3, and he still has the composure to hit a guy like Todd Harrelson, like Greg mentioned, that had 3 catches, I guess, for the total for the season, hits him right over top of right over top and underneath the coverage, gets that play, comes back, and still has the presence of mind during the chaos at the end to get the ball snapped. I would be remiss if I didn't mention your quarterback there.
Well, TJ was never rattled. That's something he never gets credit for. TJ, at no point in the 4 years that he was a starter, maybe as a freshman he'd get it and he had the freshman jitters, but beginning his junior year, TJ didn't really get rattled, not on the field. Fan pressure and some of the stuff that happened off the field, most of it undeserved, would affect him on a personal level. And I was there for some of that. And I think TJ would tell you that, there was some criticism, some stuff that happened to him off the field that sort of comes with the territory, but some of it got kind of vicious. That stuff, that stuff wasn't cool, but anything that happened on the field, there was nothing that TJ couldn't handle. He was not the guy in the huddle who was freaking out. He was not, who seemed stressed out. And I think the Music City Bowl was a perfect example of that too, because, you pointed it out. TJ's completion percentage wasn't great. His yardage wasn't great, but there was a lot left on the table. There's a lot of meat on the bone. Mm-hmm. In most of the games, TJ was the quarterback. We had the dropsies. We had a concentration issue sometimes with catching the football. TJ very rarely ever made a bad decision. Maybe a yard or two in a different direction. Maybe he leads a receiver a little better. Maybe puts it at a slightly higher point where only the receiver can catch it. But TJ threw a very catchable ball, and he always knew where to go with the ball. So his decision making was never the concern, and his composure was never the concern. So yeah, TJ's ultimate numbers, that's the best way to judge a quarterback, I guess, if you're going to do it objectively. But subjectively, unless you're in that huddle or really watching the film and sort of understood what you were watching, TJ always knew what he was doing. There was no frazzling of TJ Yates. His composure was always excellent.
So, Greg, before we get into the melee that was the end of this game, what are you seeing or what are you feeling? Again, and I don't remember if you mentioned earlier. Were you in a press box or were you on the field?
Well, I was in the press box for the bulk of the game.
Okay.
But then, with about 5 minutes left, Buck Sanders and I sauntered down to the sideline. So, the end of the game, we watched from the field.
Okay, so that'll be a good segue. Did you guys have any sense as it got into the fourth quarter, late in the fourth quarter, that it was going to come down to the wire? Because it kind of seemed like UNC was just letting their chances slip away and slip away and slip away.
Yeah, it did. The fact that Tennessee looked pretty good there. The third quarter was what it was, but they took the lead early in the fourth, or I guess midway through the fourth. You kind of had the feeling that the home field crowd was going to be beneficial to them, and that North Carolina just had to have a couple good plays put together. And it looked like there at the end that Tennessee was going to be able to maybe run out the clock. And defense, steps up, and North Carolina has one more chance. So I never felt as though this was a game that North Carolina was destined to win. But I did think, as Mike laid out, TJ Yates was not going to cower in this situation. The year before, when he's getting things thrown at him after one of the home games, I talked to him after the game, and just as a man, I'm a little bit pissed off that fans are treating the quarterback that way and throwing stuff at him. I was a little.
It was Florida State.
It was a Florida State game.
Yeah,
I guess it was a Thursday night game, right?
Because I got hit with it as it bounced off his shoulder pad.
Yeah.
He was getting stuff thrown at him as we were walking through the tunnel. Yeah.
Right. So, I'm a little irritated, and I'm not even playing the game, and yet I'm talking to TJ, and TJ's TJ, calm, cool, collected. And so if you can keep your poise in that kind of moment, this goes throughout the whole season, but you always kind of felt like, he would give you a chance, and he may not make the big play, but he really wasn't going to hurt you. And so up until the final minute, kind of thought, North Carolina has a chance. They've got a great field goal kicker. But there wasn't a lot working for the offense late. And so you kind of in that moment of, all right, well, something's got to work for them. They're running out of time.
All right, so let's get to the juiciest part of this. And I know, North Carolina fans, especially the ones who were there, probably love hearkening to this story. And I don't want to belabor the point about, well, what if it didn't play out the way it did? How painful would it be? Because, in the end of the day, North Carolina won the game. But I want to try to set this up for everybody. I'm sitting here looking at the play-by-play. So UNC has punts after the failure to convert the 3rd and 20 or whatever it was. UNC has to punt to Tennessee. Tennessee gets it with a minute left. Gets 3 stops. Carolina burns their last 2 timeouts, and then UNC punts. Tennessee punts. UNC has a touchback, gets the ball to start with 31 seconds. And then is when everything goes sideways. Katie bar the door, all of the old cliches you want to use. That's essentially what was getting ready to happen. So, Mike, 31 seconds. You guys have the ball. What are the play calls? I mean, we've talked about how TJ was very calm and very collected. So everybody can look to him and feel a sense of composure with him. But help me understand what is the play calling in a situation like that? Does Coach Shoop send in 4 or 5 calls and then you pick them based on that, or do you know ahead of time? All right, this is what we're probably going to do, just based on repping end of game situations.
Yeah, so I mean, we rep 2-minute drill and we rep end of game situations every single week. So we had an entire season worth of, I'll call it a toolbox that we knew we were going to draw from. And specifically for that game, based on what Tennessee was doing defensively, we had a plan for that situation. And If I recall correctly, our 2-minute drill in practice that week was an under 1 minute type of 2-minute drill where we had to go the length of the field. So it was a very, we made it as hard on ourselves as possible in that 2-minute drill in practice. And so we knew the protections that were coming, and it was a lot of, we were in a lot of empty backfield. So a lot of 80s protection. We'd go a lot of 60s protection with, once in a while, some 6-man, where the back would release if his guy dropped into coverage. We'd get another receiver out into a route, and we knew that stuff because we ran that stuff, I should say, because it was our bread and butter, and we were all very comfortable with that. We knew, offensive line knows all the calls, receivers, running backs, tight ends all know the route combinations that come off of those packages. So, when you get into those situations, you revert back to what you know. So we had an idea of what was coming and what we were going to run. It was nothing was called that no one didn't know how to run. I mean, every guy, down to the third string knew exactly how to run, what would be called, and what may actually be called in that situation.
Greg, I'm going to guess, and again, I'm going to reset this for our listeners, hoping that you guys get a chance to go back and watch this because it does live on YouTube, and we'll link it in the article when it's posted on InsideCarolina.com. But it starts 1st and 10 from the UNC 20. First play, Yates goes to the aforementioned Todd Harrelson for 28 yards, who then gets hit with an absolutely gross launching, targeting, whatever you want to call it, helmet to the just in between the shoulder blades, which adds another 15 on the top of it.
I'm sitting here watching it right now, Joey.
Gets UNC to the Tennessee
Balls away.
37-yard line.
Balls away and Todd's dead. There it is right there.
It's brutal. And how Harrelson holds on to the ball, I'll never know. Greg, I'm assuming based on where the way the bench is lined up and where that ball was caught, was that right in front of you and Buck?
We were a little bit further down to the left if you're looking at the YouTube replay.
Okay.
But yeah, we saw it and we heard it, more importantly.
So is that one of those situations where you guys are like, Harrelson? Oh, Todd Harrelson. Because, again, he was just a guy that didn't get used a lot that year.
Right. And Todd was a guy that had a lot of potential. Mm-hmm. He was the kind of guy that you'd hear a lot about in the offseason. So you're always kind of waiting.
From Tennessee, wasn't he? I feel like he was a recruit from Tennessee.
May have been.
I'll look that up. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
May have been.
Rashad Mason was from Tennessee. I think he was from Nashville.
He was from Nashville. Right.
Yeah.
But that was the situation, where first of all, you're worried about is the guy going to be able to get up?
Right.
Because that was a very rough hit. But when you see it, you're like, wait a minute, did that guy really do that? All of a sudden, forget about the clock. Now you're only needing, 15 yards to get a comfortable field goal attempt. And so you go from saying, okay, this is going to be a miracle. Maybe they can get lucky to all of a sudden saying, all right, well, they've got a shot now. They just have to make a couple good plays and they can at least force this into overtime.
So my mistake, Todd Harrelson from the 252 Chesapeake, Virginia,
That's right.
Oscar Smith High School. But good call on Rashad Mason because he absolutely was from Tennessee. Mike, so they have that stupid launching targeting penalty, which again, that's just a mental breakdown. It's a guy trying to just go in for a kill shot that he didn't need to make. Do you guys feel like at that point, oh, we got him now? Like from a standpoint of they're rattled, or is it still very much like we've got to do this, this, and this?
No, I mean, we never, unfortunately in that situation, you never feel like you've got them because that's a luck thing. We got lucky we didn't get lucky that Todd caught the ball. We didn't get lucky that TJ put the ball where it needed to be. We got lucky with an extra 15 yards. So, we didn't feel like we had it, but the one thing we did realize was that Tennessee was starting to implode the way that they had imploded earlier in the season on film, late in games. And they were making mistakes, and they were doing that throughout the game. I will say that was one of the most talkative games and one of the dirtiest games that I'd played in. I've put Virginia as the dirtiest team we played year in and year out, and then you got State and Tennessee are pretty close there.
Well, now I got to make you elaborate. If you're talking about some of the chirping that was going on, give us some examples.
Some of it's not suitable for work, but I mean, that's
okay. Share us what is suitable.
It's a lot of cursing, a lot of insults, a lot of making fun of people's bodies. And I was the one doing most of that. And if you go back and you look at me in a uniform, I had no business making fun of people's bodies in a uniform. But yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of that. That Tennessee team had a lot of what turned out to be pretty decent NFL talent on it. Malik Jackson on the defensive line specifically. turned out to be a pretty good player for a little while. And, you see guys like that on film, and if you're a guy who talks, you start figuring out a way to get under their skin. They were doing the exact same thing, but Tennessee talked every single play, no matter what they did, no matter how bad they got beat on a play. There was always somebody running their mouth, always somebody talking. That stuff gets frustrated after a while. So I was impressed by our ability to stay composed. Offensively, we didn't have any dumb penalties. We didn't get any stupid, unsportsmanlike penalties that I can remember. Tennessee should have had more, but the refs kind of let us go. It was kind of a backyard brawl type of game. But we never felt comfortable after that 15-yard penalty because that's all luck. Now, the one thing I will say is that the very next play, we run 300 protection, which is just a quick strike. Dwight Jones runs a slant, and he gets hit real late, and it was obvious. There was a ref standing right there.
If they hadn't called the one on Harrelson, they would have had to call that one.
And I don't know if they, that could be a makeup call or whatever that was, or a makeup non-call because they didn't think maybe Todd actually was targeted, but I don't know how you make that argument. But that should have been another 15 yards. Now, when we saw that, we realized that Tennessee was having to resort to some stuff. Tennessee didn't think they were going to win that football game. When you see things like that on the field, you smell blood in the water a little bit. Tennessee was having to start doing dumb stuff because they thought that was the only way they were going to get momentum back on their side and get the tone back in their favor. It obviously didn't work by the end of it.
Sure. At that point, it's like, okay, they're in full goon mode. Greg, are you thinking in your head about
goon mode? Yes. Yeah, that's exactly what that is.
Greg, are you thinking in your head at that point about having to rewrite your gamer, or is it just one of those things where you're just kind of caught up in the moment? Because I mean, you're the consummate pro. You mentioned how this season would have been one of the most enjoyable ones for you to cover. At that point, are you rethinking your game column, or are you just kind of caught up in the moment because this stuff's happening right in front of you guys?
Right. So the interesting thing is that this was the year that we were not doing deadline gamers. So like now I've got to have a story up, 5 minutes after the end of the game. At that point in time, I didn't have that requirement. So I was able really to the idea is I could actually soak up what was going on. For example, earlier in the year, we were underneath the field goal post at Florida State. And so to experience that, and you kind of feel the emotion of the teams and the crowd. And so that was very beneficial. And so fortunately, I was not as worried about my gamer because I had a little bit of time to wait on that. And I was really just kind of trying to run the numbers in my head and talking about that penalty against Harrelson. That moved UNC to the 37, Tennessee's 37. Well, Casey's long that year was 49. So they're only, 5 yards from field goal territory. And so that kind of gets you to perk up a little bit. And the thing I mentioned earlier, and Mike's alluded to this with the crowd, early in the day, the crowd was already very vocal, very optimistic, had a few too many drinks probably. And it was really after that hit that I think you felt some tension. You felt it start to build.
The pucker factor showed up.
All correct. Right. That's when things started. You felt that vibrant energy from the Tennessee fan base at that point in time.
It's a very diplomatic way of putting that, Greg, because that vibrant energy turned into batteries in your face.
Right.
Yeah, batteries in your face, glass bottles at your helmets.
Spitters. My aunt got a spitter dumped on her from about 10 rows up. Yeah.
Look, you can buy those at some of the souvenir shops in Tennessee, depending on which rest stop you're at. But
spittoons.
Yes. So here we sit. UNC actually incompletes a pass. They get a Shaun Draughn rush, seemed like a basic off tackle call.
It was 14 inside zone. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it literally runs right behind Ingersoll's shoulder pad. It gets another 7 yards. And then it gets more gross because, as defensive players are supposed to do in that situation, the dude takes forever and a day to get off of Shaun. And then the drama really starts because the chaos happens. There's no timeouts left for North Carolina. We would find out later that this would actually change the course of football legislation in that rules were implemented in the offseason to stop this from happening, both eventually in the NFL, but also in college. Greg, at what point did you notice that, they're not going to get this playoff?
It's interesting because when you're watching it, you're thinking, okay, there's 16 seconds left. Plenty of time to run a run play. And with Tennessee, and Butch talked about this after the game, and Mike mentioned this earlier. Tennessee had been doing a lot of 8-man drops. And so as Butch said, you figure they're going to drop in this situation. If they only rush 3, maybe you can still 5 to 10 yards and make it a lot easier for Casey. And then you see the tackle. He's tackled with like 13 seconds left.
Yeah.
And then, as you say, it's just like the slow. I mean, it takes forever for the referees to get over there. Shaun's slow getting up. You're kind of like, come on, guys, you gotta get this going. And then you start to see some of the field goal team go on the field. And at that point in time, you're like, oh crap, this is going to end up. This is going to turn out very poorly for North Carolina. And I know we can dive more into it, but TJ Yates really saved the day.
So, as we would find out, what happens in real time. TJ runs back out there. He's going to try to clock it. Then the coaching staff sends on the field goal unit. Half the offense comes off. Half of the field goal unit is on. There's probably 16 or 17 UNC players on the field at one point in time. Mike, do you remember, or at least how do you remember your movement during that chaos? And then what did the video tell you your movement was during that chaos?
Well, I mean, so that's something else we drill, and we know that if it's a late game situation, we'll bring Casey on for a last minute field goal, and I can't remember what the code word for it was. If it was
lightning field goal.
Lightning field goal, yeah.
Look at Greg.
Yeah,
look at the brain on Brett.
Yeah. So lightning field goal. Lightning field goal was that was the play. There was a call on the field, and I can't remember if it was kamikaze or what it was, but we made a call on the field, so we all knew offensively that we're probably going to kick a field goal here. There was just confusion in terms of subbing personnel out. I remember watching the clock, so I disengaged from my. Oh, excuse the language, but I mean,
we'll
I
edit that out. It's all right.
Yeah. Oh shoot! I take off and I head towards the line of scrimmage, and I'm just grabbing everybody around me, and I'm watching the clock, and we're down to like 2 seconds, and I throw my hand under. I'm like, "Get down, get down, get down." I'm yelling down the line. Everyone's yelling, "Get down, get down, get down." We finally snap the ball. TJ spikes it. We got 1 second, and I hear the ball hit the ground, and we got 1 second to go. So I'm just standing there, and I'm like, okay, fine. We're about to kick the field goal. We just stopped the clock. We're going to get a 5-yard penalty. Fine, whatever. Ref waves it off, and I'm standing there, and I'm waiting for them to correct this error, because I'm watching the light bulbs in the scoreboard read
Right.
1, so I know that atomic clock we've got sitting somewhere over here on the sidelines reads 1 and something. I mean, we've got more than a second here. We did it in time. We're just going to get a 5-yard dinger because we had too many people on the field, and it took them several minutes to clear that up. Tennessee's players are going nuts. They're throwing helmets. They're celebrating. I'm like, no, this game isn't over. And I'm like, this is not going to end like this, because I'm watching it again very calmly. Like, this is going to get fixed. We're going to kick this field goal. But as more time went on, it felt like it was taking forever. And I'm like, are they really going to screw us out of this? And they finally did the right thing. And the rest is history. We backed the ball up. Casey kicked the field goal, but we knew the whole time we were kicking that field goal. That run was designed to just put the ball where Casey wanted it.
Mm-hmm.
All we were doing was trying to position the football, get a few extra cheap yards, just like Greg said. But yeah, I mean, I remember watching everything happen as it was unfolding, and it seems surreal that in that year, and this is the sort of stuff that goes through your head in the moment. It's like seeing your life before you die.
Sure.
I'm seeing the whole year play through, and I'm like, we went through all of this, and you guys are really going to end this game right now when we shouldn't. We're going to be on Sports Center, and they're going to talk about, oh, Carolina got screwed, and there was a second left. They should have been able to kick the field goal. What would have happened? And we're going to be sitting there playing this what-if game on this bowl game, just like we played the what-if on the entire season. This is the stuff going through my head. Like, as I'm standing there watching Tennessee's guys do backflips on the field and stuff, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And then luckily, rightly, the refs corrected the error, just hit us with the penalty, and we got to kick the field goal.
I love that you were that composed in the moment, because and I don't know if it was alcohol induced or not, but I was not that composed.
I wasn't nearly as I wasn't as drunk as you.
Okay, well that's good to hear. Greg, what did it feel to you? I mean, follow up on Mike or take us in a different direction, but your perspective, because that seemed like forever and a day. And again, they actually called the game over on the field. I've never seen anything like that.
Right. Well, a couple things. Number one, I saw exactly what Mike saw. In that I thought TJ, I thought there was probably more than a second left when he snapped and spiked the ball. So I thought they were going to have to take a look at it. But full disclosure, my father is a Tennessee graduate, therefore is a Tennessee football fan. And so I've watched a lot of Tennessee games in my lifetime. And I happened to watch the Tennessee LSU game October
Earlier
of
that
that
season.
year in Baton Rouge.
Yeah.
For those who may not remember, Tennessee, I believe, was up 14-10. LSU had like 3rd and goal, 2nd and goal on the 1, getting ready to score. 20 seconds left. Bad handoff. The ball goes scooting back. Time runs out. Tennessee wins. Game's called over. Derek Dooley's on the field, motioning the fan or the team to get off the field. LSU's fans are distraught. Tennessee had 12 men on the field. So the game goes from being over to being a replay of the down. LSU runs it in for the 17-14 victory. So this is what Tennessee fans are already feeling because they have experienced an opportunity for a huge win at LSU like 7 or 8 weeks earlier.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And now this happens. So that was one of the things that was kind of running through my head. I was like, dang, this is going to be another close ending for Tennessee. And, didn't expect it in the way that it actually did. But that was something that was going through my head as I saw the game clock tick to 0.
And again, Greg, you've covered sports for a long time. Mike, you took a lot of snaps. I'll go to you first, Greg. You ever seen an ending like that before where they call the game over on the field? And, I've seen before where teams have prematurely celebrated. I've seen before where, referees were just waiting to go through the formality of checking to make sure that I have never seen a game that was called over on the field. Referee said the game is over, then comes back a few minutes later and says, okay, we're going to look at it. And then comes back what seems like an hour later and says, oh, by the way, we screwed up. Have you ever, either one of you ever seen anything like that before?
Certainly I haven't covered a game like that. I've seen some wild endings, but certainly not like that.
Mike?
Yeah, I've never played in anything like that. I mean, I've like Greg said, I've had wild endings. I mean, Florida State that same year was, wide right. I mean, that was a crucial ending, a critical ending, a very exciting ending that I didn't think was going to happen in that game. Just like this was an ending I didn't think was going to happen in this game, at least the end of regulation. I mean, we know what happened in overtime, double overtime. But what was really funny was that none of the fans that left the game were allowed back in after that. So the stadium was completely full of 69,000 people. Nice. But then when the game's quote over and people start leaving, and then they call the game back, the only people that were allowed in the stadium were the ones who were still there and didn't walk out the gate, which was like 20,000 people.
Oops.
It was like playing in front of it was like the spring game crowd is what it was like. It was like playing in front of a scrimmage.
I remember that being slightly different because, again, Tennessee fan was already headed to Broadway celebrating. And I know that when we walked across the bridge, like Greg was talking about earlier, back to bars, the morose and somber feeling amongst the wave of orange was something else. So we get through that. The refs actually say, okay, we messed up. There was 1 second left. They do back UNC up 5 yards, as Mike said, because there was a rule violation. Casey Barth kicks a 40-yarder, just beautiful. Go to overtime. UNC scores, and then UNC gets a touchdown. I think Shaun Draughn was not in the first time. Lost one on a really bad, or not a really bad, but what looked like a vicious, turned his head 180 degrees, face mask.
It was not good.
Yeah, TJ Yates gets in. And so then it's the game's UNC up. Tennessee then scores. They get a touchdown to Luke Stocker, who had gone. Did you and Luke cross paths in Tampa, Mike?
Yeah, we were in Tampa together. Luke's a really good dude.
Yeah, so Luke Stocker gets a touchdown, which is just a beautifully thrown ball by Tyler Bray, which then
it was a better catch.
That's true.
Better catch, one-handed in the back of the end zone,
and my one Jackson draped all over him, I think.
Yeah, it was Luke was a good player. That was a great catch,
and that induced the now infamous Tyler Bray double knife throat slash, which tied the game. Double overtime. He comes in, throws. I don't know who he was throwing to. Mike, what do you think he saw on the play? Because he throws an interception to Quan, who Quan had sunk. I know the receiver fell, but I still am not sure what Bray was seeing when he threw the ball, because he hit Quan Sturdivant right in the hands, And as we heard on a 40 Club podcast with a lot of your teammates and Tommy and I, Quan still swears up and down he could have housed that interception. But what do you think Tyler Brace saw when he threw that pick?
I think Tyler had young kid jitters that finally bit him. And the thing that the guys had seen on film leading up to that game finally caught up to him. And that was his youth and his exuberance and his gunslinger type mentality. And it ended up biting him. He didn't count on having fourth year senior, at the time, top rated middle linebacker in the draft, Quan Sturdivant, dropping back into coverage unexpectedly. He didn't think he was going to have that. What he saw was the guy who had some depth right behind Quan, and he was just trying to hit him with a shot right there on the sidelines and keep the ball moving. He didn't think Quan was going to be dropping back like that. But if you hear Quan describe it, he just like you did, he threw it right to him. Quan to this day doesn't know what that kid was looking at. But I think Bray just had it in his mind in that situation as a young player. He had been coached that he's got max 2 options, and he, just being a young player, keyed into his first option. He knew where he was going with that ball from the start, and he was going to get it there no matter what, because that's what felt comfortable to him. In that high pressure situation, he was going to go with what felt comfortable. Consequences be damned. So he went to his primary option, the one he was most comfortable with, probably the one that he drilled the best in practice and felt the most comfortable with coming out of practice during that week. And coming out of the season on that particular play in that particular situation, and he just forced it. And he didn't bank on having super savvy Quan Sturdivant sitting right there waiting to pick it off.
Yep, and it really looked like, and I thought this at the time and watching it again, I thought the same thing this time. He didn't give himself any bit of a moment to get set when he dropped back in that play action. I mean, he threw off his back foot, which I'm sure played a role into it. But even still, I mean, if I'm not sure exactly who it was behind Quan, but it seemed like if Quan didn't get it, the other person behind him, that may have been
Gene Robinson.
Was that Gene Robinson? Okay.
Yeah.
May have had an opportunity at it as well. So just a bad decision, as Mike said.
And I that's a great analogy by both of you guys. I think Mike's right. He locked in on who he was going to go to. And Greg, your point about him rushing it, it was all over but the singing at that point. So UNC has the ball. All they got to do is get points on the board. Bring in Mr. Automatic after a run to set things up. Mr. Automatic, Casey Barth comes in, hits the game winner. Greg, what was the first thing you did after the game was over? Who was the first person you talked to, or what was your first reaction as you were kind of amidst the melee?
Wow, that's a good question. So it was after Casey's kick in regulation, when the beer bottles and the liquor bottles came out. We were down about at the goal line, and I believe it was a Jack Daniels. That would make sense, being Tennessee. Pint bottle landed maybe 3 or 4 feet to my left, and I was like, "Oh, crap!"
It wasn't me.
Yeah, right. And so you kind of feel that initial surge, right? And then you get into the game, and then Carolina wins it. So I think initially we're all just kind of looking around, trying to figure out what is going to happen here with the crowd. The lasting memory that I will have, and I wish I had a photo of it. I think there's a photo somewhere around, but it's Dante Page Moss picking up a beer bottle and saluting the crowd.
That was right in front of us, by the way. Yes.
Just fantastic. And the social media world that we live in now, that would be something to remember.
And Dante Page Moss had an incredible game that game too.
Blocked the extra point. That's
yes.
Right.
So Mike, I'm going to come to you, and I want you to give me the most Al Bundy, just go full Firestone on me here. When you guys won that game, you realize that your career at North Carolina is over, but the way that it ended, all the action in the last, the overtime periods happens right in front of that little pocket of UNC fans. I'm assuming your family was there. Tell me kind of when Casey splits the uprights, the guys on the field went nuts. I can't remember if you were on kick team or not then, but how did that go? Like, just talk me through that whole celebration from soup to nuts.
Yeah, I was one of the wings I was the field wing on the field goal team, which is the position I held for 4 years with them, under Butch. And when that kick went through, I just turned around and immediately looked for Casey, and he just started sprinting. So I took off after him, and everybody dog piled them and picked them up and put them on their shoulders. And it was in the moment, it was surreal because it felt like there was like this exasperated relief that after everything that had happened that season, everything that happened in that game, that you said it early on in the podcast here, that game was a microcosm of that season. Everything that went on, all the stuff that went on, the ups, the downs, the back and forth, the adversity, this, that, and the other, it all finally came together. There was finally something positive, really positive to take away from that 2010 season. Just like I was sitting there and I saw the season flash before my eyes, and I had, this feeling of desperation when they called the game originally. I had the exact same experience 20 minutes later at the end of double overtime when Casey kicked that kick, with an entirely different feeling punctuated at the end of it. And we picked Casey up, and I remember grabbing him and hugging him and just telling him thank you. And Casey knew. I mean, nobody was more excited for the seniors and the upperclassmen on that team than Casey. Yeah, another guy doesn't get his due. Casey was a consummate teammate, and his brother Connor before him. Those guys were wonderful teammates. They were wonderful people, and they were completely automatic. We knew that if Casey had a chance to win that football game, that if we put it in his hands, he would pull it off. I think there was one time Casey let us down in the 2 years he was my kicker, his brother before him. There was one time a Barth let us down. It was NC State 2009, and he shouldn't have ever been in the situation he was in the first place, because that should have been a 3-touchdown win no matter what. So don't even blame Casey for that. We knew Casey was absolutely automatic, and if Casey Barth and Connor Barth are the only kickers I've ever played with where you feel comfortable putting the game in their hands. You always say, don't leave the game up to a kicker. That's parlance amongst offenses in football. Don't ever leave a game to a kicker. Don't leave it in the ref's hands. Don't leave it in a kicker's hands. But Casey and Connor were different. I was more than happy to leave it in their feet, because if we did, chances are we're going to have a pretty positive result. And I remember just holding Casey up and thanking him and hugging him. And, then we made our way to the stage, and the whole thing just felt like, again, this exasperated relief. Like, thank God this is how it ended, because I couldn't take any more disappointment after the 12 months leading up to that, man.
It's funny, if you go back and look at the box score of this game, and I want to come to Greg for some post game insight. If you go back and look at the box score of this game, it's full of a lot of names of kind of unsung heroes for UNC. And when you think about kind of where the program was, the number of guys that lost games due to injury or suspension or being withheld by the school for the NCAA investigation, but some of the names in there, like Ryan Taylor comes in.
That was the first name I was going to say.
RT gets 85 yards on 9 catches. And this is a guy stepping in for Zach Pianalto. And Ryan Taylor had primarily been a special teams guy up until then. But Todd Harrelson getting that big catch that he had, and, literally almost having the breath snatched from his chest cavity. Christian Wilson had 2 catches in that game.
Mike Ingersoll split out as a wide receiver in that game. Oh, sorry.
That never happened. Nobody believes that. That's just rumor and innuendo.
Yeah. Ed Barham lost his sternum on the exact same play.
But that's the funny thing is there was a lot of guys on that roster that kind of stepped up and did very much the old cliche next man up. Greg, I want to talk to me a little bit about covering that post-game locker room, because if this season was one of your most enjoyable seasons to cover, that post-game locker room had to be one of the most fun post-games you ever walked a mic into.
Oh, for sure. It was pure elation. And that's the fun thing, is that the guys are just grinning from ear to ear. As Mike said, I think they realized that what could have been a very bad ending to a tough year didn't end that way. And the fact that it ended the way that it did, I don't know if fitting is the right word, but it kind of felt that way. Like this season needed some kind of oddball ending. And so for those guys to get that, it was fantastic. So yeah, it was just pure elation from all of them. And we're not used to getting TJ Yates grinning from ear to ear in post game, and that's what we got. So that was funny. But in the Butch Davis press conference, what was interesting is that there were some Tennessee media there, and they were not happy with how the ending of that game came out. For fans of
I
Triangle
shouldn't laugh, Greg,
Media,
but I'm laughing. I'm sorry. That's funny.
right, fans of Triangle Media, we tend to be very diplomatic and try to play as unbiased as humanly possible, which sometimes is tough to do. SEC media does not adhere to those policies, and they are very much in favor of supporting their teams vocally. And the funny thing is that a guy sitting beside me, front row, I think everybody will recognize the name, was a man, and I'm not sure if he had moved on from the Tennessee beat at this point in time, and he had covered in the SEC as a whole. But it was Clay Travis, who was a big Tennessee guy.
That's
And
Ingersoll's buddy. Yes, Clay Travis.
Clay Travis,
$100 million man now. That guy.
he is right, yeah.
God dang.
He was not happy with how that game played out, and so he asked repeatedly to Butch Davis if Butch thought it was fair, and if the 10-second rule needed to be changed, and if Tennessee should have won that game. And Butch finally, after being very nice, eventually said, look, that's an NFL rule. We're playing college. It is not a college rule. So we won the game with the rules being appropriately applied. And I always remember after that press conference saying, man, that guy was fired up. And here we are 10, 11 years later. And
he's still fired up.
Right. I tell you.
Got everything under the damn sun.
Oh, it's and I'm sure at some point in time he probably wanted that rule named the Clay Travis rule, just because.
I think he wants most things named after him.
All right, guys, let's put a bow on this, because this is one of those games where, yeah, especially you guys being where you were for those moments, I think we could probably crush a nice few adult beverages and continue talking about it. But for the sake of our listeners and for the sake of time, let's put a bow on this. I want to come to each of you for your final thoughts and kind of parting shots, if you will. Greg, what's your I guess your final word on the 2010 Music City Bowl between Carolina and Tennessee?
Well, selfishly, as a reporter and a media member, the thing that we never want is a blowout or a boring game, just because it's hard to write about that kind of stuff. This game gave us content for weeks, which is great, and just the ability to kind of experience it on the field the way that it ended, and to really kind of understand what was happening with the crowd, how the players were reacting, to watch chaos on the field, and there's TJ Yates and I mean, let's be fair, a lot of the offensive guys, I'm sure Mike included, knew what they were supposed to be doing. It was the guys coming off the sideline, the field goal team, where things kind of got mixed up. But the headiness to be able to snap the ball and make sure everybody was set, at least the offensive guys, all that was very fun and unique to watch. And then you never like to see fans throwing things onto the field, but it adds flavor to it for sure. And as I mentioned, the Dante Page Moss beer. What do you call that? The salute, I guess.
Beer salute, yeah.
Right. I mean, that forever is ingrained in my mind. So it's as a football fan, it was a joy to watch how it played out. And as a reporter, it's one that I'll never forget. It's up there as one of the best games that I've ever covered, just because how it played out.
I wish there was a photo somewhere of that trophy pinger. We're going to have to hit up Hawk and see if he's got one of those. All right, Mike, I'm going to leave the last word for you, because you were, this is the cap on your Carolina career, and this is the last snaps you played in a Tar Heel uniform. So share with us your lasting images, or just if you can put into words kind of what your final thoughts about this game were.
Well, it was poetic for the team and for that season, and it was poetic for me personally. So that season we've talked about it ad nauseum here for a decade, and what feels like for a decade on this podcast so far tonight. It was up and down. It was back and forth. It was a lot of uncertainty. We didn't know where we were going, which way was up, most of that year. And that game, again, was a microcosm of that entire season. And all those emotions and all that uncertainty and all the back and forth, existed in that game too, in the small bubble of that one football game. And it ended in a way that I thought did that season justice. And for the guys that stayed, and for the guys who were who are able to suit up and take the field. It was the just ending for that year, for my teammates and for the senior class, for that coaching staff, who the head of which would not be there the following year, which no one was anticipating at the time. That year was followed by an interim head coach who, again, with a boatload of talent, did as good a job as an interim head coach can do under the circumstances he was dealt. And that coaching staff, the staff of assistants and coordinators under Butch, the staff that Butch assembled, needs to be given a lot of credit, not just for the way that game was handled and the way that season was handled, but for the way the next season was handled. That was clearly the right staff to be in place for that team and for that program at the time, because they were able to lead them next year under equally, if not more difficult circumstances. It was poetic for me personally because I grew up a Carolina fan. Carolina was the one offer that I wanted, and I had about 20 scholarship offers come out of high school. Carolina was one of the last ones to offer me, and I held off on committing for an entire football season my senior year, waiting for Hal Hunter and Dave Brock and John Bunning to offer me a scholarship, because I knew in my heart that though I loved Warren Beelan and though I loved the coaching staff at Vanderbilt and they had recruited me the hardest, and though I liked some of the coaches that were out at Virginia and some of the coaches that were at some of these other schools, my heart was in Chapel Hill ever since I came to camp there. When I came to camp the summer going into my senior year of high school, when I went to that camp at Carolina, that was the first time I'd been on Chapel Hill's campus in an athletic capacity. And it was at that point that the dream kind of set in that, I always wanted to go to Carolina and be a student. And I always dreamed of, man, it would be really cool if I could play sports there. Growing up, I thought, it'd be cool if I could be a Carolina basketball player. But that was the first time going into my senior year of high school that the dream really felt like it could materialize. And from that point forward, I wanted to come to Carolina. So when Carolina offered me, it was my dream to come to UNC, and I took that offer. And I came to Chapel Hill, and I wanted to build something with what was at that point not a great team and the program that wasn't in great shape. And my class, I think, had an integral role in building that program to a stable-ish place. Obviously, that last year, things were relatively unstable. But I think the talent that was there and the culture that we had built allowed us to have a year that ended with some success. So it was very poetic for me, the last game in a Carolina uniform, to end it with a win, to end it dramatically, and to end it with a season that I thought we could all be proud of, which is all I ever wanted to do for that school, was to come in, be a student. And I couldn't ask for more than to leave that school with something that I hope the fans, the athletics department, and our fellow students could be proud of. And in that regard, it was very poetic for me. And it's it's pretty cool to be part of one of the games that people still talk about to this day, amongst us, obviously, but, even nationally, you hear about the 2010 Music City Bowl comes up every once in a while when people are recapping certain seasons. I'm sure Clay Travis has talked about it in the last 10 years. I'll go scour Outkick and see if I can find some mention of it. But it's cool to be a part of that and to represent the university that way. The school that I grew up loving, that was always a dream to play sports for. I got to live that. And it was pretty remarkable for me personally.
Clay dubbed it the Music City Music City Miracle Part 2 is what he has described it as.
Yep.
I would much rather close this on Mike's poetic note, because I think that feels much better than regurgitating some of Clay Travis's verbal diarrhea. But hey, look, I think that's a phenomenal way to wrap this show, and I do think it was one of the most memorable games of Carolina football, at least in modern history. I really, that's probably one of the more fun away game trips that I've ever been a part of, and I just appreciate you guys coming on to talk about it. And so we will make sure that all of our listeners who are listening and watching this right now, you'll get a chance to see the link to the game that we used during this rewatch. So you can go back and check it out. And hopefully some of the stuff that Greg and Mike brought up today will be very, I don't know, we'll stir some things among you and in your heart and feelings and mind and all that nostalgic mumbo jumbo. But we appreciate you guys listening. Right now, we're going to go talk to the guy who was the offensive MVP of that game, Mr. Shaun Draughn. Tarborough's finest is going to come on and talk to us a little bit about his experience and kind of a game that was absolutely a breakout for him and meant a lot for his pro career. But we'll talk to Shaun in just a few minutes. Hope you guys will stick around and listen to that. But we appreciate you joining us here on the first episode of season 2 of the Throwback on InsideCarolina.com. For Mike Ingersoll, for Greg Barnes, I'm Joey Powell. Stick around. I'll talk with Shaun Draughn next. What's good, everybody? Appreciate you joining us here on the Throwback season 2, episode 1, talking about the 2010 Music City Bowl. And the guy that I've got on right now was the lifeblood of the UNC offense in that game. I mean, he had just an insane amount of touches. He had 26 touches in one game, and for a guy that had been splitting carries that year between Johnny White and Tony Elsley and some other guys. Tarborough's own Tarboro stand up, Shaun Draughn. How you doing, buddy?
Good, brother. How about you?
Man, I can't complain. Appreciate you making time for us today. And this game was a fun rewatch, and I'm
Yeah.
sure that you've probably lived it many times in your head because it was just a statement game for you. And I'm not just talking about stats. I mean, just the way you
Yeah.
ran. It was a very just determined. One of the guys on the NFL Network likes to call them angry runs. There was a lot of angry runs by you in this game, and I want to kind of start from a little before this actual game. I mean, you and your teammates had gone through just one dogged season with everything that happened in 2010.
hmm
And what do you remember about, when you guys found out, all right, you're going to have this chance in Nashville to play against an SEC squad? Kind of what was the feeling in the locker room?
I mean, it was a relief for one. I think the guys definitely wanted to have a bowl game, and early on in the season, it didn't look like we were going to even have a season.
Yeah.
With missing all the guys, but it was a big relief, and then to compete in a different league against another opponent that I feel like we kind of, I can say notched, but it was a good challenge for us, and I think we were all excited.
Yeah, and I think a lot of fans at that time remember seeing Tennessee on the bill, and they weren't that far removed from being a national contender. Granted, they
Right.
were going through some coaching turnover and all that at the time, but they still had a lot of stroke with their name. Um,
hmm
what do you remember about when you guys actually got into bowl prep? What was morale like? Were there guys that were kind of just cashed from playing such a tough season that had so much surrounding it? Were guys just excited to play? I know some guys were injured, and there's a lot of guys will go ahead and have their season, their postseason surgeries and stuff done like that. What was
Right.
just the morale around game prep and when you guys had your 15 or so practices to get ready for Nashville?
I think it was, from what I remember, man, it was good going in. I mean, like you said, we had a lot of guys with injuries. You had guys that who were on the bubble to actually even play because of academics.
Yeah.
If they were eligible, and some, I can't remember how many guys, but there were some people who were academically ineligible to play that game, I believe. And of course, he had the injuries, but going in, man, that '06 class, man, we were just so tight. We came in, we were one of the classes to, they call it, change Carolina's history, because we were a good class, and we were just so you know excited and kind of sad at the same time, because that was 4 years, 4.5 years of us just being together from the jump, and a lot of guys were actually still there, which is kind of not done a lot in college or anywhere for that matter, to last that many years and have those guys and not just be on the team but be key contributors. And that was a big thing for us, and we were just excited to go out and play, man. And it was a long season, like we said, and Coach Davis had us all hyped up and ready to go. I mean, and definitely prepared.
It's neat to look back at too, because a lot of you guys in that class were in-state kids who had played high school
Yeah,
in state. You guys had played Shrine Bowl and All-Star games together. You'd camped together, and then all of a
right.
sudden, this is the end of your run in Chapel
hmm
Hill, and through all the
Right.
adversity and turmoil you guys had dealt with, It's neat to kind of see this and hear you kind of speaking at it from the old wise man's looking back at it, and knowing that was the kind of the end of your time in a Carolina uniform. Uh, don't want to get too into detail because it might be hard to dig up. Do you remember any wrinkles from the game plan that Coach Shute put in for you? And, again, knowing that you had a lot of reps for your last 3 years, but again, you guys have been splitting time, and you know how coaches are. They always want to get creative for bowl games. Do you remember any of those
Yeah,
wrinkles that Coach Shute might have put in?
man, not necessarily for me, other than I think I had a play where I motioned out of the backfield at receiver, and it was just just come and go route just to try to create a mismatch with their linebackers, which I think we probably could have done a lot more of, just looking back at it. But just I think that was the only wrinkle, man. We had, I know the short yardage one, we actually practiced that for the first time during that prep. It was I was at fullback and I was in a 3-point stance on the short yardage. And I think we actually converted that play as well. And then we had a play off of that, I think, where it was like, he was faking and then it was a little pop pass or something like that. But other than that, man, we ground and pound, man, running the ball, running the stretch, running the sweep. We had a few gun runs, but for the most part, man, I think it was pretty much what we did all year. Like I said, it was that little wrinkle where I motioned out, and then I think it was at one point we did the motion out, and then we motioned back in, but that was just to get a read to see if it was man or zone. But other than that, I don't recall. That might be a better question for TJ.
Yeah, I'm sure he's having talked to him in the past. His memory is absolutely insane on the little
The details.
yeah, the plays off the plays that he remembers.
Exactly.
Let me ask you this. So this was one where, again, you guys had been a very complimentary backfield throughout the season. You and Tony and Johnny were pretty good about splitting reps with each other. Neither one of those guys were available for this game. It was strictly basically just going to be you and Curtis Bird in the backfield for most of the game. So what was your mindset when it came time to kick the game off? I mean, did you feel like, all right, this is my time, or did you feel like, it's were you worried about being fresh in the fourth? What's kind of going through your head as the marquee guy for this game, your last one in Chapel Hill?
Yeah, I think it was kind of, I don't know, poetic justice maybe. I don't know, but
we'll
it's
allow
just the way that the whole way that year went, man. I mean, it was unsettling for me personally, to be honest with you. Are these text messages ringing? I'm sorry. Like,
no, I don't hear.
Can you hear that?
No, you're good.
My family is going crazy right now. I'm trying to silence them, but I don't know how to do it from my iPad. I'm on my iPad.
We don't hear. You're good.
Good. Like I said, it was a little unsettling that year, but and not to belittle any decisions that the coaches made, but there were some things that me personally I didn't agree with, but that game kind of like you said, it was a statement game for me because I was able to solidify what I did in the previous years when I was actually the starter, because I didn't get to start that year, I don't think, many times. And then I was injured some of the year. And then, when I came back from the NCAA stuff, it's kind of like, I didn't have a position. I was more of a backup at that point. And, to go into the game, knowing that I was going to tote the load, I mean, my hair was on fire. Be real with you. It was a point where I had to make sure I proved myself to, I don't know, solidify myself in the draft because I was undrafted, but, to let, coaches on the next level know I could do it. And, my teammates knew what I could do. My coaches knew what I could do. So it was just a point where I was trying to go out with a bang.
You're kind of headed this way. How much do you think this game played into your, getting signed as a UDFA and getting looks from pro teams? I mean, 'cause you ended up having a fairly long NFL career. How much do you think this game played into that?
I think it played. I mean, you never know like what decisions they made and why they made them. But I think this game did kind of help my stock. And saying I was catching out of the backfield, I was blocking, pass blocking, short runs, breaking tackles, made a long run. So kind of did it all this game. So it kind of in a nutshell put together a biography of what I could do in the league.
I mean, there was definitely, you had a pretty good, if you just want to look at
Mhm.
cut ups, you had a pretty good audition to show just from this game. And I
Yeah,
think if you go back and look at, 23 carries, 3 catches out of the backfield, like you said, they were moving you around all over the field, both pre-snap and post-snap. Um, you housed one,
hmm
you got your touch in
hmm
the first 5 minutes of the game from 58 yards out. Take us back to
yeah.
that play. How much do you remember about it? Do you remember the name of the play? Do you remember what it was called? Do you remember juking that safety out of his shorts with just a little left-footed plant? I mean, take us back to
Yeah,
that play.
yeah. So what was it? The fifth play, I don't know, fourth or fifth play of the game or
It
something
was
like
quick.
that.
It was very quick. I mean, they'd had their chance, and then UNC had the ball, and again, 58 plays. It couldn't have been that far into a drive. I mean,
Right.
58
Yeah.
yards.
So
Excuse me.
yeah. So we didn't run the same place to the other side, but we ran like a stretch to the other side. And then he dialed it up and he said, we're going to try to get on the outside. So we put a fullback. I think Christian Wilson was actually playing fullback at that time.
He's the one
And
that he had the block that broke you.
yeah, so he I was just following him. Really, he kicked the guy out and I, set it up. Now I saw daylight, nothing but daylight. I was like, okay, I'm riding. Then I see the safety coming down. He was moving too. Like I knew he was going to open pursuit, and he started to slow down. But I was either going to try to run past him or try to cut back. But I don't know. I was just feeling it. The juice was on me at that point. So I was gonna act like I was gonna keep running. So I did like like a stutter step, like I was gonna try to outrun him, but then I cut it back. And then I think Ed Barham, getting another good block right off of that cut. And from there I started looking at the jumbotron and I was gone.
It's
But
funny because I remember seeing the replay, being at that game. That was one of the first stadiums that I remember too, since it was a pro stadium that had the full end zone width jumbotron there. And I
jumbotron,
remember
yeah,
seeing the replay of watching you look up at yourself.
yeah, yeah, I
Um,
did.
but yeah, man, that little left leg plant you put at about the 20 or 25 to get that safety. I mean, his hips were broken at that point. It was
Yeah,
just you,
yeah.
you
I
you
mean,
felt
stuff
bad for the
like
guy.
that, like that's the type of stuff that I think kind of helped me. When you mentioned that, that's the type of stuff coaches looking for. Can they make them miss in the open field? Can you get yards after contact? So I think that was one of those plays that kind of put together a lot of things in one play. But yeah, we got to the end zone and it was loud in there. We had a little patch of blue.
You were right in front of us. Yeah, right in front of the
Yeah,
UNC fans at
right
that
in that
point.
corner.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, I was looking at that, my parents was out there and I was live. It was a good moment, man. It was fun.
Definitely got you and the team off to a great start. As I mentioned earlier, 23 totes for 160 yards is,
Mhm.
and I think you had been averaging somewhere in the 50s per game. So I mean, to say this was a
Yeah.
breakout at the last
Yeah.
game of the season would have been kind of an understatement. All right, so you get this big touchdown, you break the seal on the game, you're coming back to the
Mhm.
sidelines. What do you remember about the celebration? Is there anybody that you remember that came up and said something to you, or do you remember one of the coaches saying something specific that just stuck with you?
So like even like during the run, I remember like when I broke the safety off,
Mhm.
they were kind of like looking like what I was gonna do, to the safety. And then on the sidelines, I remember this vividly. Like I think it was Brian Overton. He was a GA at the time. I think he's actually coaching with Butch Davis now
Mm.
at FIU. He was at ECU for a while, but he was on the sideline. And everybody's pointing like he out. He's out. And they'll see everybody just going crazy. And then I come back to the sideline and of course Ryan was there, Ryan
Uh-huh.
Houston and Johnny White. They were like one of the first ones to come and pat me on the head and it was hype. it was one of those things like when you got to the sideline, it's kind of like, okay, we not settled in, but like, okay, we know what we can do.
Yeah.
So let's keep the momentum going. And then the defense was playing, lights out. And just the sideline, the morale was there. Like it was like, okay, we can compete with these guys, which I feel like we knew we could anyway. But that just I think it's on for the game.
Yeah, and getting that first score, I think, was obviously huge for UNC and for you guys because it ended up being just a slugfest. A lot of the stats were almost split down the middle. The time of possession I think it was like 25 seconds difference. I mean, it was really
It was one of those.
absolutely. And so I think it was good for you to be able to set the tone that way, knowing that it was going to go back and forth. All right. I'm going to skip the bloodbath in the middle of the game unless there's a specific play that you remember, because I think we've got a lot to talk about with regard to the last few minutes.
All right.
I want you to talk me through the ending. You guys get the ball down 3, 31 seconds left. You get a final carry in regulation.
Yeah.
And like defensive players are supposed to do, he's taking his time getting off of you.
Yeah.
And then things went nuts from there. And
yeah.
To put this into context for our listeners and viewers who might not be used to this, the ending of this game literally changed the rules for college and pro football with regards to, now there's a runoff or, if it's a penalty on the offense in the last minutes. So this was kind of the last of its time. But as much chaos has happened, I want to hear that from Shaun's perspective, knowing that play call comes in, you get your carry, you get off tackle, get 6 or 7 yards, I can't remember, but somewhere around there. And then, oh boy's just kind of laying on you. Tell me what happens from there.
Yeah. So like you said, I get the run. I was actually trying to score. Like I didn't want the field goal team to come up. But when I saw that, I wasn't, I didn't want to fight for any extra yards and wasting the time. So I got, went down, and it was already heated. Somebody was doing the same thing, this big D lineman. I got into it with him, early in the game for them doing that. And, I didn't want to get a penalty. So it was a lot of things going through your head, like, don't react. I'm known for being a high head, but don't react. Just, looking to see if we're going to run another play or, what was the field goal team running on. So I'm like, if you look back at the film, kind of like looking at the sideline and looking at the field, and then I see everybody running on, like switching off. So I was like, okay, we got to go. So I run to the sideline, and I'm looking up at the clock. And then all of a sudden I see TJ jet back on, and it's like, he don't know what to do. And then he finally got it, then spiked it. I'm like, and your naked eye, you couldn't really see the clock and him spiking the ball, whether it was, time left on the clock or not. And then they like call it. And I'm like, bro, ain't no way. So, they running all on the field, and we were still looking around in like disbelief, of what happened. But from that perspective, that's kind of what I remember. Like I said, it's been a while, but that's what I remember from that moment. But when it happened, and they said the game, we started shaking hands, and I don't think I shook anybody's hand, but I saw Coach hit it.
Did you feel like it was over?
I didn't, because I was trying to wait for like the confusion to die down, because I was like, there's no way like it can end like that. In my head, like, can't end like that. Like, I feel like I knew he spiked the ball, so I didn't know whether it was still time left or not. So I was still kind of just walking around waiting for the ref to say something. You know what I mean? Like whether the game was like over or whether it was time left. So I think, I was still kind of waiting for that. And it took a while for the refs to even, intervene and say something. So, and then once they, I guess, got together and said what they were going to say, they said it was still time left. I think didn't it take a while for them to?
It took a minute. Review? Yeah, it was even watching it back, like it was uncomfortable how long it took them to make a decision about whether they were going to extend the game or not.
Because Coach Davis had already, went over, like I said, and shook the hand, and some guys were headed to the locker room, and those guys were still on the field, And yeah, that's what I remember. I knew I was like, it can't be over, so it's still that little, piece of doubt, or piece of hope, that it wasn't over.
Ever seen anything else like that in your career?
Nah, never. Shoot, never. Even in the league, never seen or been in a situation like that, except for that time.
It's definitely probably a once in a lifetime thing. And then of course, gets to overtime. You had another crack at one. They face
Yeah.
masked you into
Oh
oblivion.
man, I was so hot about that. And then if you see me, I'm like,
oh yeah,
it's the face mask. And then I think somebody ran over. It was Jonathan Cooper. He was like, he called it. You okay? You okay?
Your offensive lineman trying to save you from losing your mind.
Always.
I love it.
It was either Jonathan Cooper, and when Cal Jolly was playing, he used to always have me off, and Mike Ingersoll. They used to always have a back, and Gary Reynolds.
That's that was not a hard call for them to make. And then then of course, game goes on. Feel like you got a touchdown. They didn't review it. TJ got one. Goes to the second overtime. Quan gets his pick. And then, they had you run it just to the right side, send in Casey Barth to get the kick to win the game for the Tar Heels. That's it. So I'm going to kind of put a bow on that. And I want to hear, what do you remember most, like looking back at this or just talking about it, between us? What has this brought back? Or is there anything that has been kind of the lasting memory? And it could be something of you mentioned your parents at the game. I mean, it could be mentioned you talking to your family, or it could have been something that you shared with some teammates in the locker room. What's the lasting memory from this game for Shaun?
For me personally, it was, that I got the MVP of the game, and, I was on stage. It wasn't a national championship or anything, but, it was a big moment for us. Like, it was a big moment for Carolina football. We're up on the stage hosting the trophy, and, just after a year of adversity, and then the game itself was just, in a nutshell, what that year was like. Like, we had the potential, like during the game, we had the potential to win and, kind of run away with it, but some things went left. Then we had to jump back and, kind of leapfrog those bad things in the game. And, at the end, again, there was some more adversity. And, we had to overcome that. So it was just just that year in general was, that game in a nutshell was kind of what our year was. And then, like I said, we were on the stage and, excited, and the confetti falling, and we hoisting up the trophy. And then I think he either gave me the mic or he asked me a question. And I told my mom I loved her on stage on the big mic.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it was a good moment, man. And that, that game, like I said, that was it. My career and our class, I think, has, that game kind of defined that. Like, it was, I wouldn't have wanted to go any other way. Like, that was the perfect game. Like, it was a good memory, man. I actually still look at, that's probably one of my favorite games to, go back and look at and just, reminisce that moment, not even, in the fact that, because I look at defense too. And like you said, that pick Quan had at the end, like, that was crazy. And then with Deontay getting hurt, man, it was a lot of good and bad in that game, for guys.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that, this game kind of put you guys' career, but more importantly, that whole season, into a nice little nutshell. Like, it put everything into a pack. You had adversity, you had guys getting hurt, like the gruesome injury that Deontay went through. Yeah. You had the defense balling out. And by the way, Quan's still mad that he had to take a knee. Like, he still wished he could have. He still swears up and down he could have housed that pick. But
right, he's way quarterback.
It's but I think you're spot on, man. And I think that's a great way to end our discussion here today. But I think you nailed it, knocked it out of the park as always. And heck, your performance today was just about as good as your performance that night in Nashville. So, Shaun, we appreciate it, man. Glad to hear things are going so well for you. Definitely, very impressed, and tipping my cap to you for your golf game getting as good as it is. But Appreciate you
sir.
making time for us on Inside Carolina and joining us here on this episode of the Throwback. But for Shaun Draughn, we'll talk to you down the road, buddy.
No problem, man. Appreciate it.
All right, we'll see you.
All right.